Have you ever felt disconnected from your surroundings? How about feeling disconnected from your own body? Almost like watching your own life unfold behind some kind of screen. Entire life experiences, actions, and memories feel as though they're foreign. They feel as though they're distant and dissolving away, without any meaningful emotions being made. Like some sort of numbness that's as a result of being dissociated with the world around you. This sensation is often referred to as depersonalization or derealization disorder. Oftentimes, when people initially learn about depersonalization or derealization, they might believe at first that it comes associated with visual or maybe auditory hallucinations, creating this sense of losing touch with reality, when actually, that's not the case. Instead, it's more commonly associated by those who have experienced it as being fully aware, but something feeling off, like being split from your own sense of self, and everything around you feeling muted, distorted, or foggy. Things begin to feel a little more mundane than what they already once were. I think what makes DPDR so interesting, and yet so unsettling to me, is that it comes with the realization that the world has not actually been changed, but instead, the fact that your perception has. I think at its very core, dissociation isn't really a disorder, or rather, it doesn't start off as one. It's more of like a defense mechanism, one that is created by the brain when it's experiencing overwhelming amounts of trauma, stress, or anxiety, that there really isn't any solution but to create distance from reality, as almost like a way of dealing with it. And this dissociation can be good in that it can help reduce or manage whatever it's dealing with, and allowing the individual to endure circumstances that would otherwise be intolerable. However, it's when this response persists beyond the original threat that it becomes negative. What once served as protection begins to interfere with everyday life, transforming into a constant state rather than a temporary refuge. Eventually, this what once was a defense mechanism starts negatively impacting all aspects of your everyday life. This feeling of disconnection alters how one interacts with their personal relationships, with their friends, and even loved ones. On top of that, everything going on inside their head feels like a jumbled mess. It's kind of like having too many tabs open on your computer, and it starts negatively impacting its performance. Things start getting laggy, becoming slow, stuff begins to buffer, and eventually, you crash. The parts of the brain responsible for emotion, self-awareness, and perception begin to slowly drift apart. And well, this results in a state of consciousness where things might feel a little empty. Some memories begin to feel fuzzy and unrecognizable. That's because those memories were never fully felt in the first place. And unfortunately, over time, this constant feeling of detachment can eventually lead to the development of secondary conditions, such as anxiety, or as previously mentioned, depression. Due to this, many people turn to different forms of communication to try and cope with their disconnect, whether from their environment or with their personal lives. Especially with how abstract DPDR can be in putting it into words, some may even turn to visual forms of expressions as alternative ways to convey their experiences. In these kinds of scenarios, art becomes a means of translation, allowing others to gain a better understanding of the kinds of experiences that some have to go through. This is especially evident in works that put a focus onto altered states of being, fragmented identities, or even unrecognizable states of consciousness. One notable yet slightly different series of artworks comes to mind when I'm thinking about shifts in awareness. The Under the Influence series by Brian Lewis Saunders. His self-portraits emerge during states shaped by distinct substances, each sketch tied to one particular compound. It's not just warped shapes that catch my attention, it's how unsteady they seem. Saunders' face shows up again and again, though with each iteration becoming more and more uncanny and unrecognizable. Shapes of eyes, noses, mouths twist or crumple without warning, sometimes disfigured beyond recognition. Mood shifts span across each image as though they're alive and looking back at you. In this series, Saunders' identity almost becomes a kind of presence that is perpetually shifting, just out of reach. I think it's important to add that Saunders' work isn't really a depiction of DPDR in a practical sense. Rather, it's an interesting series of works that showcases altered states of mind. that might provide a helpful context into what a dissociative state can be like. Obviously, everyone's experiences are different, especially with how Saunders deliberately explores these altered conditions voluntarily, whereas for many, dissociation often occurs without choice or control. The overall visual language in these series of drawings depict fragmentation of one's identity, the sense that perspectives are capable of shifting, becoming more volatile, and the discomfort that is a result of recognizing oneself while feeling this detachment. These images don't feel like Saunders inventing a new version of himself, but instead confronting an unfamiliar version of his own reality. It's as though these works bring out impressions that allow viewers to engage with the feeling of dissociation and derealization without requiring it to be rationalized. This self-portrait in particular is one that I found to be an ideal example of how disturbing things can get under altered states of mind. Labeled bath salts, this drawing feels less like a portrait and more like a moment where Saunders' identity is actively coming apart. Initially, Saunders' face is discernible, despite it not appearing human. The features feel almost like they're struggling to remain in the same place. The eyes are heavily darkened and uneven, with one taking shape as a dense scribbled mass, while the other is barely holding together its shape. They stare blankly, not seeming to focus on anything, as though Saunders is looking inward, trying to gain some semblance of understanding of what he's turned into. Looking at bath salts, it's hard not to think about how depersonalization is often described as feeling like you're watching yourself from a distance. This portrait feels as though that distance is now present, as the form of Saunders is there, only now that it's heavily disfigured beyond recognition, like seeing yourself from a warped reflection and realizing that reflection feels more honest than the original. This visual disconnect is carried throughout the entire series of portraits. Another one of my personal favorites is his psilocybin mushrooms portrait. Immediately after looking at it, I couldn't help but notice how drastically different his experience must have been comparing it to his bath salts portrait. This one still retains its interesting visual elements. However, this one feels a bit different. Saunders' face is more recognizable. However, it's still apparent in how abnormal it feels. It's almost as though his face is dissolving, slowly fading out of reality. The deliberate use of vibrant colors in this composition also feels more playful and lighthearted, and this is slightly echoed by Saunders' intense gaze. His eyes are wide open, alert, seemingly giving off a feeling of amazement, or even curiosity. It truly feels as though he's losing his grasp on reality. The last work that I want to discuss is this crystal meth portrait. This one stuck out to me amongst the rest for how drastically different the overall atmosphere feels. It felt more graphic, almost gory. Maybe it has something to do with the decision of hues that Saunders used, that range from hot pinks, reds, and pale yellows. The application of the paint also adds to this effect, as the thick smears layer on top of each other as opposed to having smooth modulations of color, resulting in a kind of visual tension. His face is still there, only now that it's been submerged behind layers of texture, like it's been pressed against glass and painted over and over again. The eyes still feel sharp and alert, similar to the previous psilocybin mushrooms portrait, only now that instead of evoking feelings of curiosity and amazement, it feels like there's something hollow about them, like he's locked inside his own body, all while his mind is continuously racing. What unsettles me most is how overstimulating this portrait feels. As opposed to the last two portraits, there is little to no negative space in the background. Everything, including the lines themselves, feel very jittery and sporadic, that it feels almost anxiety-inducing, if I'm being honest. Even though he's smiling, it still feels emotionless. I'm getting no sense of ease anywhere in this image. There is nothing in this portrait that allows the viewer's eye to rest, and I believe that that constant visual tension makes this portrait feel less like a moment being captured, and more like a state of mind that you're stuck inside. Whenever I look at Saunders' work as a whole, I can't help but think about just how fragile our own actual sense of reality really is, how easily perceptions can shift, how the world we trust can suddenly feel like it's just out of reach. Depersonalization and derealization aren't just clinical terms. They're experiences that, when lived, change the way you relate to yourself and everything around you. Something that reminds me that even in those distorted unnerving moments, there's a part of us still observing, still trying to make sense of it all, and still trying to exist in a reality that feels just beyond our grasp.